Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another special gathering. Before we begin, I want to know who's here with me tonight. Leave a comment with where you're watching from and what time it is for you. All right, let's get to the first story. Good evening, Dom. My name is David. For quite a while, maybe 10 years since I ended up out here, I thought the life I had, even though it was tough as nails, was the closest a man like me could get to happiness. We didn't have any luxuries, far from it. We lived in a simple little house of exposed brick, stained by time, with an old roof that creaked in the scorching heat. It sat on a piece of land that used to belong to my father-in-law, far from everything. A good few miles of bumpy dirt road to the nearest small town. On one side, a corn and bean patch that barely produced enough for us. On the other, the thick woods, dark even by day, sloping down the hill and ending by a cold creek where we got our water and did our washing. I remember the early years there, me and Marianne, newly married, full of plans. We'd laugh so easily while patching up a wall, or she'd plant bright flowers by the kitchen window that refused to grow in that unyielding soil. It was there I felt at home, secure. On that ground I started my family with her. We had 3 kids, our biggest treasure. Leo, the oldest, already a clever little guy at about 8 going on 9, always my eyes and ears. Sophie, a sweet 5, almost 6, clinging to her mother's skirts. And Pete, the baby, chubby-cheeked and smiley, who'd just turned 1 when things started to get strange, to unravel in a way that sends chills down my spine just thinking about it. Up to that point, if life had its hardships, I couldn't truly complain. The routine was heavy, sure. Waking up before the rooster crowed, tending our small farm that refused to yield much, fixing fences, caring for the few chickens we had. Sometimes I picked up odd carpentry jobs or helped out with neighbors' harvests, neighbors who lived even farther away, so we could earn a little extra money. It was work from dawn to dusk, the kind that leaves your body aching and your hands calloused, but it had its rewards. The smell of Marianne's freshly brewed coffee in the morning, the sound of the kids playing in the dirt yard late in the afternoon, the relief of lying down at night, exhausted but with a clear conscience. Of course, we had our arguments now and then, days when we were both on edge, kids making a fuss, bills getting tight. But nothing out of the ordinary, nothing a good night's sleep and Marianne's smile the next day couldn't cure. Marianne. Oh, she was the backbone, the soul of that house. She had a strength that came from within, a stubborn optimism that made things happen. Before I could think of getting up, she'd already be on her feet, sweeping the house with a straw broom, stoking the wood-burning stove, taking care of the children with a patience I lacked. She kept a tiny garden out back, her pride and joy. She'd talk to the collard greens and tomatoes as though they were people while she watered them from the well. I'd tease her, but deep down, I admired that care. I never heard her complain about being tired, and believe me, her workload was as heavy or heavier than mine. I'd insist she sit a bit, rest her legs in the old rocking chair on the porch, but she'd just laugh and say resting was for later. She also had her faith, quiet but firm. She was Catholic, praying a Hail Mary daily. She taught the kids to pray before bedtime, blessed the food on our table, and asked protection from the saints whose worn images sat on a small shelf in our bedroom. But when she got mad, Lord help us, her face darkened in an instant. A tool of mine left out of place, a sassy word from one of the kids, and she'd go silent, a silence that weighed more than a shout. But I knew it was her way of caring for what was ours, that little world we'd built with so much sweat and hope. In those days before the shadows arrived, I felt like a lucky man. A healthy, beautiful family, our own place to call home, Sparky, our scruffy yellow mutt, always alert to any odd noise, the fresh morning air drifting through the window. I felt I'd made it in life in my simple way. Never, not in my worst nightmares, did I imagine something so dark, so silent and suffocating could come to rot everything from the inside, like a piece of fruit that looks fine on the outside but is decaying at the core. I watched with my own eyes as our small world fell apart, slowly, like a sandcastle on the riverbank. I watched the woman I loved, my safe haven, turn into something else, something I no longer recognized, something that filled me with a chilling fear. Looking back, the first odd thing was so small, so seemingly unimportant, it almost slipped past. Marianne started storing things. Not valuables, but bits and pieces from outside. Things from the woods or the ground. It began with smooth creek stones, the kind worn round by running water. I thought it was cute at first. She put them in an empty jar on the window. Then came dried leaves of different shapes, some large, some twisted. Strange little sticks with knots that looked like eyes showed up next. Then dried beetles, cicada shells, even a turkey vulture feather I once found. At first I chalked it up to a quirky habit, maybe the isolation messing with her head. But she began arranging these collections in hidden corners of the house, atop the kitchen cabinet where I could barely reach, inside a drawer of old clothes, under our bed in a dark corner. It got weirder when I found, while tidying the small tool room, a pile of damp black soil and some chicken feathers arranged in a circle inside an old iron pot we hadn't used in ages. It looked like a nest, or worse, some bizarre offering. "What's this, Marianne?" I asked, showing her the pot, trying not to sound scared or accusing. She was in the kitchen stirring a pot on the wood-burning stove. She turned her head slowly, taking a second, maybe two, to focus on me. It was like she'd been far away, in another place. "Nothing, David. They're just things I found. Pretty, aren't they? Leave them where they were." Her voice came out slightly slurred, lacking its usual firmness, almost uninterested. The way she spoke sent a shiver down my spine. I put the pot back in its place quietly. Let it go. I had a small field to weed, a fence broken again by a stubborn cow. Men do that. We swallow what we can't understand so we don't rock the already fragile boat of our routine. But it didn't stop there. Her habits got stranger. A few weeks later, I started noticing other things. Sometimes, in the middle of the afternoon with the sun blazing outside, I'd find her standing inside the house in the living room or hallway, staring at a fixed spot on the wall where there was nothing. Her mouth would hang slightly open, her eyes glazed over, as if she were listening to some conversation or witnessing a scene that existed only in her head. It lasted a few seconds, maybe a minute. Then she'd blink hard once, twice, shake her head as if shooing a fly, and go back to whatever she'd been doing, a bit out of breath, sometimes wiping her brow like she was confused or scared by her own lapse. If I asked what was wrong, she'd deny everything, say she was just tired, just thinking. She also started humming, and that unnerved me more than the weird collections. It wasn't the lullabies she'd always sung to Pete, nor the old country tunes we heard on our battered battery-powered radio. This was a strange melody with no words, a low monotonous sound, repetitive. One note up, two notes down, over and over. A weird lament. Kind of sad, kind of empty of feeling. She'd hum softly while cooking, while hanging clothes on the line, while patching Leo's pants. She didn't seem aware she was doing it. When I asked what tune it was or where she'd heard it, she'd stop immediately, blushing like I'd caught her doing something wrong, and say I was overreacting, that I was making a big deal out of nothing. But I heard it, and Leo and Sophie heard it too. One night I woke up in the early hours with a full bladder. I got up carefully so as not to wake anyone. The house was pitch black, just a faint bit of moonlight coming in through the crack in the kitchen window. I went outside near the side of the house. When I came back, tiptoeing in, I saw a figure standing in the dark living room. My heart skipped a beat. It was her, standing there, back turned to me, motionless like a statue. I thought she was sick or sleepwalking. "Marianne, are you okay?" I asked in a hushed voice. She didn't answer. The silence in the house grew heavier. I stood in the doorway, a chill creeping up my spine. I took another cautious step into the room. That's when I noticed. She was swaying slightly, almost imperceptibly, forward and back, and that low humming, that soulless melody was there again in the dark. Ice flooded my veins. I called her name again, a little louder, my voice cracking. "Marianne, it's me, David." She stopped swaying abruptly. She turned her head slowly over her shoulder, the movement stiff, unnatural. In the darkness, I couldn't see her face clearly, only the silhouette against the faint light from the window, but I felt a shudder that wasn't from the cold, it was pure fear. "Just thinking out loud," she murmured, her voice different, deeper. And without another word, she returned to our bedroom, walking stiffly, never looking at me again. That night I couldn't sleep. I lay there tense, listening to her breathing beside me, which sounded normal enough. I expected her to start humming again at any moment or to get up, but she stayed quiet, unmoving. Then, for the first time, I sensed it clearly, a strange smell in the bedroom, a smell that didn't belong, not sweat, nor dust, nor stale clothing. It was a strong, earthy smell, like wet soil after heavy rain, like damp vegetation or rotting leaves. But it was in our bedroom, it seemed to come from her. I moved closer, pretending to adjust my position in bed, and the smell was stronger by her hair, her neck. It made my stomach turn. The next morning it was completely gone, but it would come back, sneaking in and out unannounced over the following days, making me queasy and sure that something was very wrong. Leo, my oldest, was always attached to me, liked coming along to the fields, learning things. But he was also close to his mum, always asking her for help or a hug. Lately, though, that dynamic had shifted. He started following me everywhere, not just out of curiosity. If I went to the shed to fix a tool, he tagged along. If I went to gather firewood, he asked to come, even though he complained it was heavy. It seemed he didn't want to stay near the house, especially if Marianne was alone with him and his siblings. "What's up, son? You've become my shadow. Don't you want to help your mom with the garden today?" I joked one day while sharpening my machete on a whetstone, trying to keep it light. He looked down, kicking a little pebble with the toe of his worn-out boot. He took a while to answer. "Mom's acting strange, Dad," he whispered, glancing around as if afraid she'd hear. "Sometimes she stands there, staring at us, but it's like she doesn't really see us. Her eyes just freeze. And she keeps humming that creepy tune that won't leave my head. It scares me. Yesterday she yelled at Sophie just because she spilled a bit of water on the floor. Mom never yells like that." That tied my stomach in knots. My boy, so young, already noticing and fearing his own mother, knowing he felt the same anxiety growing inside me, made it worse. I started paying closer attention to everything. The house, once noisy with games and laughter, seemed quieter now, but it wasn't a peaceful silence. It was tense, heavy, like right before a huge storm. Sophie, who used to be so talkative, was quieter, often sitting in a corner, hugging an old rag doll, eyes scared, jumping at every sound. Pete, who'd been all giggles before, cried more than usual, a sad, mournful cry that tore at my heart, hard to calm, especially after dark. It was like he felt it in the air. One afternoon I was coming back from town, having earned a little extra cash by cutting some planks for the store owner. I was humming softly, tired but glad, thinking about buying a bag of assorted candy for the kids next time. As I neared the house, still on the downhill stretch of the trail, I heard a scream. Not loud from pain, but muffled like stifled panic, followed by a clatter. I ran the rest of the way, heart pounding. I burst into the house, expecting the worst. Marianne was in the kitchen, back turned to me, hunched over the sink like she was about to vomit. The kids were huddled in a corner by the cold wood stove, eyes wide. Leo had his hand over his mouth. Sophie was crying softly, clinging to her brother's leg. "What happened? Who screamed? Are you all okay?" I asked, my voice coming out louder and harsher than intended, my fear making me abrupt. Marianne turned around slowly. She was horribly pale, Her hair stuck to her forehead with cold sweat. A fresh red scratch ran along her arm, like she'd clawed herself. "It's nothing, David. Calm down. I just got startled by a big lizard that slipped in through the window. I dropped a pan, just the scare." But the pan was in place on the stove, and the look on her face wasn't from a run-in with a harmless reptile. It was pure dread, a fear that ran deep. Later that day, when Marianne went to bathe Pete out back, Leo tugged at my shirt, his face pale and serious. "Dad, there was no lizard," he whispered, eyes darting toward the door. "Mum was looking at that broken mirror we keep outside by the bedroom window. She stared at it for the longest time. Then she started crying quietly, and then she screamed and scratched her own arm. She said there was someone else in the mirror looking at her, a scary-looking woman with bad eyes." My blood ran cold. That little shard of broken mirror we used for shaving hanging on a nail outside the window. Someone else. Bad eyes. That night, after the kids finally fell asleep, exhausted by silent fear, I tried talking to Marianne. She was sitting on the edge of our bed, hugging her knees, staring at the bare cement floor that seemed to swallow what little light the lamp gave. "Marianne, my love, what's really going on?" I sat beside her, trying to hold her hand, but she pulled away. "Leo told me about the mirror this morning. You're not okay, I can see that. Don't you want to go to the clinic in town on Monday? We'll get up early, take the kids, we'll figure something out." She lifted her head slowly. Her eyes looked sunken, circled by dark hollows I hadn't noticed so clearly before. Her skin was stretched taut over her cheekbones. "It won't help, David," she said, barely above a whisper, weak, resigned. "It's not something a doctor or medicine can fix. There's something here, with me. Or maybe it's not with me. Maybe it's this place." She made a vague gesture encompassing the room, the whole house. "I feel it in my head sometimes. A pressure, a buzzing. Or," she paused, swallowing, briefly glancing toward the dark window where the woods began. "I feel it out there, watching, waiting." "Waiting for what, Marianne? What are you feeling? Tell me, for God's sake." "I can't quite explain," she nearly shouted, but her voice broke, turning into a stifled sob. "I'm always cold, even in this heat, and that smell, that earthy smell, it's like it's coming from me, and it won't wash off no matter how many baths I take. Sometimes when I'm alone and it's quiet, I feel someone breathing near my neck. I hear my name, whispered so low, but there's no one there. I see shapes at the edge of my vision, movements where nothing should be. Today, in the mirror, it wasn't me, David. It looked like me, but it wasn't. The eyes, they were just darkness. And the mouth, it was smiling at me in a way." She couldn't finish. She started crying, low, desperate, without strength. I held her close, and this time she didn't pull away. She clung to my shirt like she was drowning. Her body was tense, rigid, trembling slightly. She was cold, despite the muggy night air. And that wet earth, rotten vegetation smell was there again, faint but undeniable, seeping from her. A deep fear gripped me, primal in its intensity, like we were sinking into something dark and sticky, an invisible swamp dragging us under, and I had no idea how to pull us out. Going to town was easier said than done. It was a good few miles of a rutted dirt road, which turned to muck in the rain. With 3 small kids, one still in arms, it took nearly 2 hours each way, longer if we had to stop. We didn't own a car, not even an old bike. The only transport was a neighbor's rundown truck that passed once a week on the way to the market, but it wasn't always reliable. And the clinic, it was a small, crumbling place with half a dozen basic medicines. The doctor, a young man more nervous than his patients, only showed up a couple of days a week, and nobody ever knew exactly which days or times. Going there and finding it closed was common. And even if I found him, what would I say? My wife sees things in the mirror, smells like soil, collects dead bugs and hums strange tunes. They'd think I was out of my mind, or assume I was making it up, maybe even call the police suspecting abuse. The fear of being judged or ridiculed paralyzed me as much as the fear of the unknown. The days that followed grew heavier, grayer even when the sun shone. Marianne wasted away before my eyes. She lost so much weight her clothes began to hang on her body. Her skin turned pale, almost translucent over her bones, with bluish veins visible on her arms and neck. She ate next to nothing. What little she put in her mouth she discreetly spit out or claimed tasted bad, like dirt or metal. She spent most of her time sitting in a kitchen chair, staring into space or lying in bed facing the wall. The lucid moments, those fleeting flashes of the old Marianne, grew increasingly rare and brief. In those moments, she'd look at me with a silent, desperate plea in her sunken eyes, like she was trapped in a deep, dark place, drowning. Night times became a silent nightmare. The kids, sensing the fear and tension clinging to the house like a cold fog, refused outright to sleep in their bedroom at the end of the hallway. Every night, it was the same. They dragged their thin mattresses and tattered blankets into the living room, all of them piled together on the cold floor, as close as possible to the door of our room, like a bunch of scared chicks seeking protection. They said they heard noises in the ceiling, scratching or quick little footsteps, like some strange creature crawling around. Leo swore up and down he saw a tall, skinny shadow, a crooked man, slipping through the dark hallway when he got up in the night to go outside and pee. Sophie began having terrible nightmares, waking up in tears, talking about ugly hands trying to grab her in the dark. Sparky, our dog, who used to be bold and slept happily in the yard, now spent the nights barking non-stop. A nervous bark or a low growl at the kids' bedroom window, or at a specific corner of the porch where nothing was there. He'd claw at the kitchen door, desperate to get inside. I had to tie him up farther away near the chicken coop, afraid he'd hurt someone or himself in his panic. I too began seeing and hearing things more often. I could no longer brush them off as fatigue or imagination. They weren't as vivid as what Marianne described, but I'd catch quick shadows passing in the corner of my eye, especially indoors. I felt an unsettling, constant sense of never being alone, even when I was working in the shed or weeding. Doors would slowly creak open with no draft. The latch on the bedroom window rattled softly as if someone was testing it from the outside. One night, I woke to a repetitive noise, a faint tock, 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 coming from inside the wall of our room, the very wall that faced the darkest part of the woods. It sounded like a fingernail scratching wood or a stone tapping brick. I got up, cold sweat trickling down my back. I pressed my ear to the cold wall. The noise stopped instantly. I waited a minute, two. Nothing. I got back in bed, heart pounding in my throat. Barely 10 minutes later, the noise started again, more rhythmic, more insistent. Tock, tock, tock. I lay there, paralyzed with fear, eyes wide in the dark, holding Marianne, who slept a strange, heavy sleep, almost like a faint, oblivious to everything. I didn't have the courage to get up again. I stayed there, listening and trembling, until dawn. To make it all worse, the food started spoiling at an alarming rate. The fresh milk I got from a neighbor turned sour in a matter of hours, even in cooler weather. Bread grew a greenish, fuzzy mold overnight. The fruit we picked rotted so fast in the basket it was uncanny. Even the water in our clay pitcher, usually our saving grace in the heat, began tasting strange, muddy, metallic. The whole house seemed sick, contaminated, decaying along with Marianne, as if an invisible blight had settled into the walls, the floors, the air we breathed. I thought seriously about getting help, leaving before dawn to trek the miles to my parents' place, or Marianne's parents, though they lived even farther away, uphill in places just as isolated as ours. Asking them to come help, to figure out what to do. But how? How could I leave Marianne like that, unpredictable, and the 3 kids alone with her? What if she had some breakdown, hurt herself, or the children? The fear of what could happen in my absence paralyzed me, and taking everyone with me, it was nearly impossible. Marianne barely had the strength to walk across the yard. Pete was heavier by the day, and we'd have to haul supplies. And I was terrified of the dark path, of what might be lurking out there, of what was already inside our home, closing in on us. Talking about leaving, even just for a few days, was unthinkable. The one time I mentioned we might go spend a little while at her parents' place, Marianne had a terrible episode, screaming that she wouldn't leave, that they wouldn't let her, that something awful would happen on the road. She clung to the kitchen table leg and refused to budge. I felt trapped in a no-win situation. Then came one night, maybe the worst of all, the moment that pushed me past my breaking point of fear and despair. We were all sleeping in the living room, as had become our custom. The kids on their thin mattresses near the door, me and Marianne on a slightly bigger one off to the side. Exhaustion overcame me in a way it hadn't in days. I crashed. I was jerked awake by a wrong kind of silence. That thick, heavy silence that screams louder than any noise. I opened my eyes. It was nearly pitch black. The lamp must have gone out. My heart hammered in my chest. I felt around. The kids were there, curled up, sleeping fitfully, whimpering in their dreams. I looked to the spot where Marianne should have been, empty. Her side of the mattress was cold. I sat up fast, panic gripping my throat. I glanced around in the dimness. The front door, which I knew I'd locked, was slightly open, a sliver of darkness inviting me outside. My blood turned to ice. I grabbed my machete, always leaning against the wall by the door, my constant companion now, even in my own house. I took a deep breath and stepped out as quietly as possible. The night was cold, moonless, the sky overcast. Everything was silent but for the incessant chirping of crickets and the distant frenzied barking of Sparky, tied up by the chicken coop. I crossed the swept yard, eyes straining to see every shadow looming like a crouched monster. I called out softly, my voice shaking with fear. "Marianne, where are you, Marianne?" No answer, only the echo of my own voice. I headed, almost against my will, toward the entrance of the woods that began about 20 or 30 yards from the house. The darkness among the trees was thicker still, forming a black wall. My legs trembled so badly they threatened to give out. Then I saw her. She was standing right at the mouth of that narrow trail, disappearing into the forest. Her back was to me, wearing only a thin white nightgown that fluttered in the cold night breeze. Bare feet on the damp ground, absolutely motionless, like she was hypnotized, staring at the impenetrable darkness among the trees. "Marianne!" I called louder, fighting to keep my voice steady, trying not to show the terror clawing at me. She didn't move. She seemed not to hear me at all. I crept closer, gripping the machete in my right hand, left hand reaching out like I was about to touch a poisonous snake. That earthy smell was overpowering, coming from her, from the woods. When I got about 2 steps away, I felt the cold radiating from her body, or maybe from the place. She slowly turned her head over her shoulder, neck twisting with that off-kilter motion like a rag doll. Her face was bone white in the meager light. Her eyes were wide, fixed on something in the forest I couldn't see, something that both enthralled and terrified her. And she smiled. God, that smile, I'll never forget it. It wasn't the sweet, tired smile of my Marianne. It was a wide smile, pulling at the corners of her mouth, unnatural. A smile devoid of any human emotion or recognition. A smile that didn't reach those dark, unblinking eyes. A smile more like a tear in her pale face. "They're waiting, David," she whispered, and the voice wasn't hers. It was raspy, drawn out, almost a growl. "They're calling. In the woods. It's time." I felt the ground drop from under me, my lungs squeezing empty. I grabbed her arm. It was ice cold and stiff. "Come back inside, Marianne, now. Please, let's get away from here." I tried to pull her back toward the house, toward the faint glow of the doorway. But she resisted with unnatural strength, far greater than her frail, weakened body could have mustered. She kept that horrid smile, eyes glued on the blackness under the trees, her body straining in that direction. "Let me go, David. I have to go. They promise." I wouldn't let her finish. I wrapped my other arm around her waist and yanked with all my might, practically dragging her across the yard. She began thrashing wildly, scratching at me with her nails, trying to bite. She was screaming incoherent things, random, disjointed words, names I didn't recognize, mingled with that ghastly humming, which now sounded mocking, louder. Stumbling and fighting, I shoved her through the door and slammed it, locking it with shaky hands. The kids had woken up from the commotion. They were now crying loudly, huddled together in the corner of the living room, their faces twisted in terror. Marianne collapsed onto the dirt floor, flailing like a wounded animal, laughing and sobbing at once, saliva dripping from her mouth, eyes rolling back until only the whites showed. In that moment, seeing the woman I loved in such a state, unrecognizable, seeing my children cowering in fear, traumatized, feeling the cold presence that had slipped in from the woods with us, looking out into the dark night that seemed to pulsate, ready to swallow our fragile little home. I knew it was over. Our simple life, our meager happiness, our sanity. It had all been devoured by whatever this was. Disease of the soul, a curse of the land, a demon from the forest. It didn't matter the name. It had won. I can't say for sure what happened after that night, how things truly ended. My memory gets foggy, stumbles, protects itself from the full pain. I recall just fragments, disconnected and dark. I only remember the constant cold, that lingering smell of damp earth clinging to everything, and that hollow smile on Marianne's pale face haunting me in the darkness, even when I closed my eyes. A smile that told me she was gone, and that maybe she would never return. Before we move on to the next story, if you're new here, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell to get the latest stories. Your presence means a lot, and your support is essential. All right, let's keep going. My name is Matthew. Life, for those of us born and raised with very little, was never a paved highway. It was always a rough dirt path, dodging rocks and tripping over roots. Ever since I was a kid, I learned to fend for myself. I worked as a construction helper, lugging bags of cement, picked up painting gigs, anything that would earn me a few bucks and put food on the table. The important thing was not to drop the ball, to keep my head high even when my body begged for a break. That's how I ended up in the big city years ago, full of hope and with nothing but the clothes on my back. And it was here, in this tangle of people and concrete, that my path crossed with Tanya's. We live in a place called Bayou Haven. It's funny to call it haven when it's more of a cramped maze of shacks, alleys, and narrow passages, squeezed between the highway and the marsh. It's the kind of place that barely shows up on the city map, where the mail carrier rarely comes and the police only show up to do raids. I arrived here not knowing a soul, and found a corner in a leaky wooden shack that let in more rain than it kept out. By working hard, one brick here, a bag of cement there, I managed to build our little house. 2 small block rooms with no plaster, but it was our floor, our roof. Tanya came into my life quietly, like she didn't want to be noticed. She moved in with an aunt who lived on the lower street. She was reserved, with an intense gaze, like she could see right through people. She had a different way of sensing the world. She wasn't a fortune teller or anything like that. It was something more inward, an almost raw sensitivity. Sometimes, out of nowhere, she'd get a shiver down her spine and say, "There's something bad close by." Or she'd wake up pale after a strange dream and warn me, "I dreamed of dirty water, Matthew. Don't step anywhere unfamiliar today." At first I thought it was odd, just a woman's wild imagination. But over time I saw there was something to it. Every now and then, one of her warnings came true. A neighbor got into an accident, or a sudden heavy rain flooded the lower street right where she said we should be careful. I learned to listen and respect her intuition, even if I couldn't grasp the logic. Our house was small and cramped, but Tanya had a gift for turning any space into a home. On the windowsill, a pot of fresh basil kept mosquitoes and, according to her, the evil eye at bay. By the door, 2 snake plants rooted in an old paint can guarded the entrance. "They cut through envy," she explained with a slight smile. I loved watching her tend to the plants at dusk, crouched gently, whispering to the leaves as if they were people. In those moments, in the simplicity of her care, I found a bit of peace in the hardness of daily life. When she told me she was pregnant, it felt like the world paused for an instant. Our first child. I remember it as if it happened yesterday. She came back from the community clinic with a little piece of paper in her hand, her eyes shining differently. She didn't have to say a word. I felt it right then, standing there in our tiny living room, like a force lifting me off the ground. It wasn't just happiness, it was hope. A stubborn hope sprouting right there in the hard-packed dirt of Bayou Haven. Tanya cried softly, tears of joy and fear all tangled together. I hugged her tight, and we stayed like that for a long time, in silence, just feeling each other's heartbeat grow faster, dreaming of a small bedroom, a crib, a future that, for the first time, seemed a bit brighter. Not long after, word spread around the neighborhood. Julia, who lived with her partner Bobby, a couple of alleys over, was also expecting. She was younger, full of life, but already carried in her eyes the fatigue of someone who works too hard for too little. The two of them, Tanya and Julia, grew even closer. It was common to see them sitting on our doorstep in the late afternoon, sharing pregnant woman secrets, morning sickness, food cravings, fears of childbirth, and the baby names they were considering. Julia dreamed big. In that baby, she saw the chance to turn a new page, to get somewhere better, away from overflowing drains and constant scarcity. "Imagine, Tanya," she'd say, her eyes shining, "my child won't grow up here. I'll find a way out. We deserve more." Tanya listened attentively, gave advice, and shared her own worries, but always with her characteristic caution. "Easy, Ju, one step at a time. What matters is staying healthy. The rest we can work on." Seeing the two of them there, bellies growing together, filled me with a strange tenderness. It was a sign of life, of continuity in the midst of so much difficulty. The loud music coming from the bar on the corner felt less annoying, and the dust kicked up from the unpaved street bothered me less. For a while it seemed like things were finding a decent rhythm. Then the story began to change. Rumors started circulating quietly at first, then gaining momentum. Some people from outside the neighborhood were around, connected to a thing called Project Safe Birth. Supposedly it was a serious organization, a non-profit with support from important people, maybe even government grants. No one was sure. The goal? To help pregnant women in the area, especially those who couldn't afford proper care. They talked about full medical support, with tests you couldn't get at the community clinic, big grocery hampers, lectures by nurses and psychologists, and most importantly, a safe, comfortable shelter for expectant mothers to stay in during the last few weeks before delivery, close to a top-notch hospital. At first, most of us were skeptical. In a place like Bayou Haven, you learn quickly that if it sounds too good to be true, it probably is. Promises are everywhere, especially near election season. But that year wasn't even election time. Yet the project folks were different. They didn't show up blasting announcements from trucks with loudspeakers. They walked through the alleys on foot, well-dressed, slacks, clean shirts, carrying folders and clipboards. Usually two young men who seemed to know the area, maybe even locals from nearby neighborhoods, and sometimes an older, serious-looking woman. They approached the women politely, spoke quietly, and showed what looked like official documents. Little by little, skepticism gave way to hope. Neighbors started talking. So-and-so went to check it out and said the place is really good, or someone else got a hamper of groceries that lasted almost the whole month. Word was that finally someone cared enough to offer real support, the kind we only ever saw on TV. Julia, of course, got excited right away. "This is our chance, Tanya," she'd say, nearly breathless with excitement. I talked to one of the ladies from the project. She was wonderful. She said the facility is beautiful, with individual rooms for those about to deliver, and the doctors are amazing. We have to go. Tanya listened, looking thoughtful. I was in the kitchen trying to fix a dripping faucet when I felt a chill. All that generosity just like that. Something didn't add up. Within a week, they knocked on our door. I recognized the knock. It wasn't a neighbor borrowing sugar. There were 3 of them. 2 young men I'd seen in passing, both with easy smiles, and the older woman people had mentioned. She wore thin-framed glasses, her graying hair pulled back in an immaculate bun, and a beige business suit. She had an air of authority, like she was there to assess, not to chat. One of the men, the chattier one, launched into a speech he clearly knew by heart. He spoke about the project, the importance of prenatal care, the risks of giving birth without proper assistance. He described the support center as an oasis: clean beds, balanced meals, round-the-clock care. He showed photos on a tablet. It seemed too good to be real. Tanya stood in the doorway, one hand gently resting on her belly. She listened in silence. I came closer, standing next to her, trying to decipher the older woman's expression. It was a cold, distant gaze that swept over us, as though we were invisible, mere numbers on a spreadsheet. "It's very kind of you," Tanya said, her voice firmer than I expected, "but we're going to the clinic right now. We appreciate the offer, but for the time being, we don't need it. If we change our minds, we'll reach out." The man tried again, saying the spots were limited and this was a unique opportunity. But the woman in glasses gave a nearly imperceptible shake of her head, and they fell silent. "As you wish," the older woman said, her voice soft yet emotionless. She forced a polite smile that didn't move a single muscle in her face. "We only care about the well-being of the mother and baby. Have a good day." They turned away and headed down the alley, folders under their arms, like they were leaving a business meeting. As soon as they were far enough away, Tanya let out a huge sigh, like she'd been holding her breath the whole time. She braced herself against the doorframe, her face paler than usual. "That was weird, Matthew. Did you feel it? I got chills just looking at that woman. Her energy is heavy. Something's really off about this whole thing." I agreed, feeling a sticky sense of unease. "Yeah, that was unsettling. They're like salespeople for something bad. But don't worry, honey, we won't get involved. We'll stick to what we know and have." The next day, not long after the sun had warmed the dirt, Julia showed up at our door, her eyes bright as stars in a clear sky. "They came by our place last night, talked to Bobby too. They're amazing people, Tanya. They explained everything, showed us the papers. It's all legit. I'm in. Bobby agreed. This is the chance of our lives." Tanya sat with her on the doorstep, worry etched on her face. "Ju, please think this through. I don't know. My gut says something's off. They showed up out of nowhere, promising us the world. Why would they focus on us here in Bayou Haven? It makes no sense." "Oh, Tanya, don't start," Julia replied, a bit impatient but still affectionate. "You always distrust everything. It's because we've never had anything that when something good appears, we think it's a lie. But this time it's real. I can feel it. It's my chance for the baby to have a proper birth, a future. Aren't you coming? Imagine if we went together." "No, Ju, I'm sorry, I just can't. My intuition is screaming at me that something's not right. Stay here with us. We'll help each other like always. The clinic isn't perfect, but the nurse there knows us." Julia sighed, the sparkle in her eyes dimming a little. "I wish you'd come, but I get it. Still, I can't pass this up. If I don't go, I'll regret it for the rest of my life." So that was that. Julia started frequenting the Project Safe Birth Support Center. At first, she'd come by almost every day to share updates, the lectures, the exercises for expectant moms, the food she insisted was top quality. She'd proudly show a pack of diapers she'd gotten or a fancy bar of soap. But as the weeks went by, her visits tapered off. When she did appear, she seemed rushed, a bit distant. She repeated the same stories, but her enthusiasm felt rehearsed. I noticed dark circles under her eyes that cheap makeup couldn't hide. She seemed thinner despite swearing she was eating better than ever. Tanya saw it all and grew more anxious. Her dreams became more frequent and darker. "I dreamed of her again, Matthew," she told me one night, her voice trembling. She was in a stark white room, very clean, but the windows had bars, and she looked at me with this lost, pleading gaze, without saying a word. There were other pregnant women there, all with that same empty stare. I'd hold her, trying to comfort her, but her fear was seeping into me too. The whole situation felt off, like a puzzle with a terrible picture slowly coming into focus. One Sunday afternoon, Tanya felt sharp pains in her stomach, cramps that came and went, growing stronger each time. She went pale, sweating cold. I panicked. The clinic was closed. The public hospital was far, and we had no car to get there quickly. My first thought was the project. Hadn't they said they had 24-hour assistance? "Calm down, honey. I'll take you to the project center. They'll help," I said, already stepping outside. "No!" Tanya practically screamed, grabbing my arm with a strength I didn't know she had. "Not there, Matthew. Please, I'd rather die here than go there." The terror in her eyes was so real, so deep, it froze my blood. I gave up immediately. I remembered Mrs. Rita, an older woman in Bayou Haven, who was part midwife, part spiritual healer. I ran to get her. She came over, calm as ever, brewed Tanya an herbal tea, gently laid a hand on her belly and prayed softly. The pain began to ease. It was just a false alarm, a scare. But the fear in Tanya's eyes when I mentioned the project stayed with me. She felt it, she knew. A few days after that scare, Julia showed up at our door in the early evening with a small backpack on her shoulders. Her eyes were puffy and red. "I came to say goodbye," she said, her voice trembling. "They're transferring me tonight after midnight to that better place I told you about, the one near the big hospital. They said it's time for me to settle in before the baby comes." Tanya hugged her tight. "Ju, are you sure it's not too late to back out? Stay here with us." "I can't now, Tanya. I've already signed the papers. Everything's in motion. And if it really is good, I have to try. If I don't, I'll never forgive myself. And I don't have the money to pay back all the help they gave me." Tanya understood. There was no point arguing anymore. She pulled a small medal of the Virgin Mary from her pocket, something that had belonged to her mother. "Take this with you then for protection on your journey. May she watch over you, and promise me you'll give us news as soon as you can." "I promise, Tanya. I promise." Julia took the medal, clutching it in her hand. "I'm going to miss you so much. I really hope you're wrong about them." "I do too, Ju. I do too." Tanya's eyes filled with tears. "Go with God. May your little one be healthy." They embraced again, a long hug full of a sadness they both seemed to sense. Julia walked off, wiping her tears, disappearing into the darkness of the alley without looking back. Tanya stayed there, staring into the night, and I knew by the slump of her shoulders that she felt it was the last time we would ever see Julia. The following weeks were a silent torment. Every time we heard a car in the street or the phone ring at the corner bar, our hearts leapt. But no news came about Julia. Bobby, her partner, grew desperate. He tried calling the numbers given by the project. No answer. One number was out of service entirely. He went to the support center where Julia used to stay. Locked up, padlocked gates. A neighbor said he'd seen a moving truck pull up in the dead of night a few days earlier, loading everything in a rush and driving off. Tanya's anxiety became almost tangible. She hardly slept. When she did, she'd wake up crying from nightmares, which were growing clearer and more terrifying. "Matthew, I saw her again," she whispered in the dark of our room. "She was in the swamp, in that deep part near the big roots. The tide was rising, the muddy water covering her. She didn't move. She was so cold. And the baby, Matthew, the baby wasn't there anymore. I felt the emptiness." I tried to comfort her, but the fear was eating away at me too. This wasn't just friendly worry. This was a grim warning. Unable to cope, Bobby decided to go to the police. We went with him, me and Julia's mother, an older woman worn down by life, her eyes hollow from crying. At the station, the reception was disheartening. We waited nearly 2 hours to be seen. The officer barely looked up from the forms he was filling out. We told him everything from the start: the project, the promises, the mysterious transfer, the disappearing support center, the disconnected phones. He yawned. "Project Safe Birth, never heard of it. Got a business registration, a permanent address? Full names of those in charge?" We showed him the crumpled flyers, the only documents we had. He glanced at them dismissively. "This doesn't prove anything. Might be a scam. Happens every day. The woman in that photo," he nodded at the picture of Julia in her mother's trembling hands. "No family, somewhere else. Any fights with the partner, debts? Sometimes they just take off on their own, you know." "No," Bobby protested, his voice thick with anger and grief. "They took her. They tricked us. She was pregnant." The officer raised his voice, patience gone. "Look, buddy, we'll file a missing person report, but I'll be honest. The odds of finding her are slim. The city's big, the world's bigger. Lots of places to hide a body. Go home and wait. If we find something, we'll let you know, but don't get your hopes up." We left the station devastated. The indifference hurt more than a slap in the face. We were invisible. Julia's life and her unborn child weren't worth a real investigation. We were just statistics. People from Bayou Haven. Expendable. That night, Tanya's scream tore through the early morning silence. I rushed to the bedroom. She was sitting up in bed, shaking, eyes fixed on the darkness. "I saw it, Matthew. I saw where they left her," she sobbed, clinging to my arm. "In the swamp, that deep spot, where the big roots tangle in the mud, buried in the muck. Only her head above the water, her eyes open, lifeless, and her belly, oh God, her belly was cut open, empty. They took her baby, Matthew. They took it." The horror in her voice, the image she was describing, it shattered me. There was no more doubt. Tanya's instinct, her nightmares, her warnings, everything fit together in a horrific puzzle. I held her, trying to shield her from the terror she'd seen, but knowing it was useless. That horror now lived inside us. Not long after, in the midst of that fog of sorrow and fear, our daughter was born. It was a difficult labor, painful, as if our little one could feel the weight of the world waiting outside. But she came strong, crying loudly, grabbing hold of life with her tiny hands. A persistent spark of light in so much darkness. We named her Victoria, a name that sounded almost like a dare. Years went by. Now Victoria is almost 10, a bright, cheerful girl who fills our home with noise and laughter. Sometimes she asks about Aunt Julia, whose face she only knows from the yellowing photos we keep in a shoebox. We make up some story about how Julia moved far away, somewhere without a phone. It hurts to lie, but how do we explain such a terrible truth to a child? We never heard from Julia again. There was no trace, no body found. Project Safe Birth vanished. The police? They closed the case like so many others. No leads. Bobby couldn't handle the anguish and the emptiness, sold his shack for next to nothing and left Bayou Haven. Rumor has it he went upstate, trying to forget. Julia's mother withered away in her grief until God took her, a couple of years back. Died of heartbreak, people say. I believe it. Tanya remains my companion, my strength. But a part of her went dark that day. Her eyes lost some of their sparkle, and her laughter came less often. Her sensitivity is still there, maybe stronger than ever, but now it walks a darker path with her. On nights when the tide is high and the swamp smell drifts into the house, I often find her standing by the window, gazing toward that deeper part of the marsh, where the roots twist into the dark mud. We don't talk about it, we don't have to. The silence between us holds Julia's memory and the horror that took her. Sometimes late at night, when the house is quiet and you can only hear Victoria's soft breathing as she sleeps, I catch myself thinking, who were those people? Why did they do what they did? Steal babies from poor invisible mothers? To sell them? For twisted rituals we hear rumors about? Were they acting alone? Or did they have powerful people backing them? People who smoothed the way and covered it all up? The police, the clinic. Someone had to know, someone must have seen something. Was their indifference just incompetence? Or were they complicit? These questions rob me of sleep. They merge with the memory of Julia's empty stare the last time I saw her, with Tanya's scream of horror in the dead of night, with the smell of the swamp that seems to carry the rotten secret of what happened. It's a fear that never goes away, a mourning that never ends. It's the horror of knowing evil is real, that it walks around in nice clothes with easy smiles and fancy promises, ready to devour the hope of the most vulnerable, and worst of all, knowing that for people like us, justice almost never comes. If you're enjoying the stories, don't forget to leave a like. It really makes a difference. Okay, let's continue. My name is Larry. Today, looking back, it feels like it happened in another life, yet the memory of that smell, of that heavy atmosphere, still makes the hair on the back of my neck stand on end. It's been 6 years since life took a sudden, drastic turn. The small metal workshop where I worked in a rural town closed down without warning. Suddenly, I was out on the street, with bills piling up and the rent for our little house, where I lived with Vanessa, my wife, becoming an impossible mountain to climb. We managed to scrape by for about 2 months, burning through our meager savings. But soon enough, we were in way over our heads. The only lifeline, fragile as it was, came from my Aunt Morgana, my late mother's sister. She lived on the outskirts of a big city, in a neighborhood that seemed forgotten by time and neglected by local authorities. She had a tiny converted shed in the backyard of her property that was unoccupied. "It's nothing fancy, but it'll do until you both get on your feet," she said over the phone, her voice sounding as weary as always. The truth is, I barely knew Aunt Morgana. After my mother passed away, contact became rare, almost non-existent. But desperation speaks louder than pride or estrangement. We accepted. The trip was long and uncomfortable. The old bus stopped at every small town along the way. We arrived late on a scorching August afternoon, the humid heat radiating off the patched asphalt. The street was a narrow corridor of houses crammed side by side, graffiti-covered walls, electrical wires tangled around the poles. A far cry from the green fields and the quiet I was used to. Aunt Morgana's house was one of the oldest on the block, its peeling paint revealing the old plaster underneath. It had a little rusty iron gate that groaned like a lament when we pushed it open. She awaited us by the kitchen door, a dish towel draped over her shoulder, her face lined with deep wrinkles and the expression of someone who gave up smiling a long time ago. Ever since her husband, Uncle Carl, died in a construction accident about 10 years earlier, she seemed to have aged 20 years in one go. The accident had cast a long shadow. No one in the family liked to talk about it. All we knew was that it had been gruesome and the company never provided the proper support. "Come in, kids. How was the trip?" she asked, without much enthusiasm. Inside the main house, the air felt stagnant, carrying that persistent smell of mildew mixed with old cooking grease and a hint of pine disinfectant. The furniture was dark and old, covered with yellowed crochet doilies. A dim hallway led to the bedrooms and the bathroom. In the back, A door opened onto the laundry area and then onto the converted shed she had mentioned. It consisted of 2 small rooms whose walls had once been white, now stained with damp patches, especially in the corner where the asbestos roof seemed to have a long-standing leak. The floor was worn concrete, riddled with small holes. A single light bulb dangled from an exposed wire, dimly lighting the place. The kitchen area was cramped, with a chipped sink and barely enough space for a stove. The bathroom was equally tight, with cheap tiles peeling off in some spots. The bedroom window faced a damp alley between her house and the neighbor's wall, where sunlight was a rare guest. "It's simple, but it's clean. If you need anything, just call me out front," Aunt Morgana said, gesturing with her chin toward the main house. We barely exchanged glances. Living there too was my cousin Luke, her only son, 15 years old, skinny, pale, always hidden behind long hair and wearing earphones buried in his ears. He drifted past us in the hallway like a ghost, mumbled something that sounded like "hey," and locked himself in his room. We didn't see him again that day. That first night was awful. The heat was suffocating, and even with the window open, all that came in was the stench of sewage from somewhere down the street. The noise was relentless. Motorcycles roaring with no mufflers, neighbors arguing, dogs barking in chorus, loud rap music blaring from somewhere nearby. And beneath all that, the sounds of my aunt's house, shuffling footsteps in the hallway, a toilet flushing on its own, a constant creaking that seemed to come from the walls. Vanessa curled up next to me on the makeshift bed. "What is this place, Larry?" she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "Easy, hun, it's just for a while. We'll find jobs soon and get out of here," I said, trying to sound confident but feeling that familiar knot in my throat. The truth was, I felt like a failure, dragging my wife into that hole. The following days were a struggle. I left early to find any odd jobs, helping on construction sites, hauling concrete bags, clearing overgrown lots. I'd return at the end of the day exhausted, dirty, often without enough money for the next day's groceries. Vanessa, after much searching, found a few hours of work at a nearby bakery. She'd wake up at dawn, get back in the mid-afternoon smelling of bread and carrying exhaustion on her face. We tried to make the little shed feel like ours. We cleaned it thoroughly, put down an old rug we'd brought, hung a few photos on the wall. But it was like spraying perfume on a tomb. The smell of mold and damp always crept back, stronger after the rain. I started to notice strange things. Tools I left in one corner would turn up in another. The bathroom door, which never closed properly, sometimes stood wide open in the morning. Other times it was jammed shut. Small things I blamed on exhaustion or my own distraction. But a sense of being watched, especially when I was alone, began to settle in. A chill up my spine for no apparent reason. Dealing with Aunt Morgana and Luke was minimal and awkward. She left before sunrise to clean houses, came back exhausted, barely spoke. She'd fix food for herself and her son, eat in silence while watching some old soap opera on a tiny kitchen TV, and then head off to bed. Luke was even more invisible. He only left his room for school or to grab food, always with his headphones on, eyes glued to his phone, ignoring our presence. Sometimes we heard muffled arguments between him and his mom, her voice rising, his responding in grunts. Then the heavy silence would return, thicker than before. It was around 4 months after we arrived that Vanessa discovered she was pregnant. Amid so much hardship, it was an unexpected ray of hope. We hugged, cried, dreamed of a better future. But the happiness soon turned to worry. That cramped, damp, noisy shed was no place for a baby, and the atmosphere in the main house. I felt it was unhealthy. There was a profound sadness there, a bitterness that seemed rooted in the walls. Vanessa's pregnancy was complicated from the start. Besides the relentless morning sickness, she felt an extreme weakness, a kind of apathy that was unlike her. She slept too much but always woke up tired, pale, She started having recurring nightmares. She'd wake up startled, breathless, talking about a dark figure standing in the corner of the room watching. Or a horrible feeling of being suffocated, something heavy pressing down on her chest. "It's just stress, honey. Pregnancy messes with us. Try drinking some chamomile tea," Aunt Morgana once said, when Vanessa mentioned the nightmares, not even taking her eyes off the TV. The doctor at the local clinic also brushed it off. "It's anxiety, Mum. Pretty normal at this stage. Try to relax." But I saw my wife fading. Her eyes lost their sparkle. She was losing weight when she should have been gaining. I felt powerless. I tried to cheer her up, took care of her as best I could, but I wasn't doing well myself. The heaviness in my shoulders that I'd felt since we arrived had turned into a constant ache. I woke up sore, as if I'd been beaten overnight. My patience wore thin. Every noise got on my nerves. The sense of a presence, never being truly alone even when I was, became almost permanent in that shed. Sometimes, out of nowhere, the air would turn icy in a specific corner of the room. And that smell, it wasn't just mold. There was a sickly sweet undertone, like rotting fruit left forgotten in a corner. "You don't smell that, Larry. It's coming from the wall," Vanessa said again one night, sniffing the air with a grimace. "Probably some dead critter in the crawl space, babe, or old plumbing. I'll check tomorrow." But I never found anything. The smell would come and go without explanation. Arguments between Aunt Morgana and Luke became more frequent, louder. We heard doors slamming, objects thrown around in the main house. One night, the yelling was so intense I went to see what was going on. I found Aunt Morgana crying in the kitchen, her hand over her mouth, and Luke standing by his bedroom door, face flushed with anger. "What happened, Auntie? Is everything okay?" I asked, uncertain. "Stay out of it, Larry. It's our business," Luke growled before slamming his door so hard the walls shook. Aunt Morgana just shook her head, wiping her tears with the back of her hand. "Go on back, son. It's nothing. Teen drama." But her eyes said something else, despair and an infinite weariness. Our daughter Bruna decided to come into the world at 7 months. It was a mad rush, a complicated delivery. Vanessa was extremely weak, and tiny Bruna had to go straight to the incubator. Those were the longest 15 days of my life, juggling time between the hospital and odd jobs to keep the little money I earned. When we were finally discharged and brought that tiny bundle back to the shed, it felt like the worst possible place for a newborn. Bruna cried non-stop, and it wasn't a normal baby cry. It was shrill, agonized, tearing at our hearts. It felt like she was in pain or terrified. We tried everything, feeding, changing diapers, singing, rocking her. Nothing worked for long. Strangely, she only calmed down a bit when we stepped outside, even with all the deafening street noise. Out there in my arms, she would sometimes sleep for a few minutes. But the moment we stepped through the gate, the desperate crying started all over again. Inside that shed, she became even more agitated. Often her eyes went wide, fixed on some empty spot on the ceiling or a dark corner of the room, as though she were seeing something invisible to us. Occasionally she'd flinch in the makeshift crib, as if startled by some sudden fright even when it was quiet. Vanessa was at her limit. Her postpartum recovery was slow, she barely had any energy, and Bruna's incessant crying only increased her stress and exhaustion. I felt physically and mentally drained. My body aches had worsened, and I had constant headaches. The oppressive feeling in those 2 rooms was almost tangible, like the air was heavier in there. The night of the mobile was the turning point. I had finally put Bruna to sleep after nearly 2 hours of crying. I was dozing off in the chair next to her crib when I heard a sharp cracking sound, followed by a soft tinkling. I opened my eyes to see the cheap plastic mobile with colorful little animals spinning slowly above the crib. Bruna's eyes were open wide, staring at it. There was no draft. The window was shut, the door too. The mobile stopped spinning, but one of the little animals kept swaying for a few moments. as if someone had just touched it. A chill raced down my spine. Bruna let out a low whimper, a sound of pure fear. I scooped her up at once. Her tiny body was stiff, cold despite the sweltering heat. She buried her face in my chest and started trembling. Vanessa woke up, startled by my sudden movement. "What happened? Is she okay?" "She's fine. Must have had a bad dream," I lied again, rocking our daughter, my own heart pounding erratically. But deep down, I knew it wasn't just a bad dream. Something had moved that mobile. Something was in that room with us. From that point on, everything unraveled. We lived in a constant state of alert, exhausted, afraid. We began to argue over trivial things. Lack of sleep and fear were corroding our relationship. We tried taking Bruna to another pediatrician who also blamed colic or maybe reflux. He prescribed medications that did nothing. I was desperate. Then on one grey afternoon, as I tried to calm a hysterically crying Bruna out by the front gate, Mrs. Carmen from across the street approached. She was a short, white-haired lady, always with her hair up in a tight bun. She'd greeted us a few times before with a look that seemed to see beneath the surface. "Young man, that baby's not doing well, is she? And you and your wife, you both look worn out," she said, her voice calm but firm. She glanced at Aunt Morgana's house, then back at me. "That house has never been a good place. Ever since Carl's tragedy, it's like a dark cloud settled over it, and a place with bad energy. Well, a new mother and a baby feel that right away." I didn't know what to say. I just nodded, swallowing hard. "Listen, I'm not one to meddle, but if you want, I could go over and bless the place. Sprinkle some holy water, burn a little sage, say some prayers. It can't hurt, right? Sometimes what a doctor can't see, faith can help cleanse." At that point, I'd have taken help from the devil himself if it promised a bit of peace. I agreed immediately. Vanessa did too, her eyes brimming with fragile hope. Mrs. Carmen came the next day late afternoon. She brought a small bucket of water, a handful of salt, a wooden crucifix, and a bundle of herbs, sage, rosemary, and maybe some protective leaves I didn't recognize. She asked permission and stepped into the shed. The place felt even heavier with her there, as though whatever was lurking didn't appreciate her presence. She walked through the rooms, flicking the salted water with her fingers and whispering prayers under her breath. Then she took the herbs and began sweeping the walls, the corners, the ceiling, still praying. I watched, skeptical yet clinging to any possibility. Vanessa held Bruna, who surprisingly was quiet, just watching Mrs. Carmen with her wide, frightened eyes. When Mrs. Carmen reached the wall that bordered the main house, she suddenly stopped. She frowned, touched the wall with her hand. The leaves in her bundle seemed to wilt in an instant. It's heavy here, very heavy," she murmured. "There's something old here, a pain that never went away, a bad feeling that stuck. This place is contaminated. It needs a lot of prayer, a lot of light." She intensified her prayers in that spot, passed the crucifix over the wall several times. When she finished, she handed us a sprig of rosemary and sage to hang behind the front door. "Keep the faith, my dears. Pray hard for this little angel's protection, and for yourselves too. Avoid fighting inside here. Bad thoughts and anger only feed what's no good." She looked at us with compassion, refused any money we offered, and left behind a strong smell of herbs and a strange mix of relief and unease in the air. That night, and for 2 or 3 nights after, there was a noticeable improvement. Bruna cried much less, managing to sleep for longer stretches. Vanessa seemed to breathe a little easier, even ate more willingly. I felt the weight on my shoulders lighten a bit. The awful smell disappeared. We had a fleeting sense of relief, thinking maybe it had worked. But the peace didn't last. Gradually, the oppressive feeling returned. More subtle, perhaps, but there. Bruna went back to her inexplicable screaming fits, especially after dusk. Vanessa's nightmares came back, and things with Aunt Morgana took a turn for the worse. She barely spoke to us, looked at us sideways with a mix of resentment and maybe fear. We overheard her arguing with Luke about the nosy old lady who'd come over doing witchy stuff in her house. Clearly the blessing had shaken the delicate balance in that place even more. It was the final push I needed. I had to get my family out of there no matter what. I intensified my search for a stable job, took any offer I could find. Finally, about 2 weeks after Mrs. Carmen's visit, luck came my way. I landed a steady on-the-books job at a mechanic's shop downtown. The pay wasn't amazing, but it was stable. With my first advance, we paid the deposit on a small, modest room in a slightly better neighborhood, farther away. We moved out in a rush on a Saturday morning, packing our few belongings in cardboard boxes and bags. I hired a cheap pickup to haul it all. While we loaded our things, Aunt Morgana stood by her kitchen door, arms crossed, her face an impenetrable mask. She didn't offer help or ask where we were going. As I passed her with the last box, I simply murmured, "Thanks for everything, Auntie." She gave a small nod, saying nothing. Luke never showed up. Leaving that street, leaving that house behind felt like coming up for air after a long dive in filthy water. I took a deep breath of the morning air, which felt cleaner, lighter somehow. In our new tiny place, small but with sunlight streaming through the window and no moldy smell, Bruna slept for hours at a stretch, a peaceful sleep we'd never seen before. Vanessa, sitting on the bed, looked around with tears in her eyes, but this time they were tears of relief. It's been 6 years now we have our own home, mortgaged to the hilt, but ours. We have another child, Pedro, or Peter, a lively, healthy boy. Bruna is bright and talkative, though sometimes she gets a distant, thoughtful look, as if remembering something she can't quite explain. She never again had those desperate cries, or seemed to see things that weren't there. Vanessa has blossomed again, regained her joy. Me? I still work at the mechanic's shop, fighting life's daily battles, but I sleep well at night. The weight lifted from my shoulders the day we left Aunt Morgana's house. We never went back. We speak to my aunt by phone on Christmas and on her birthday. Her voice is always the same, distant, tired. I heard from other relatives that Luke got mixed up with the wrong crowd, caused some trouble with the police, but that now he's calmer, staying home all day playing video games. Aunt Morgana keeps to her routine of cleaning other people's houses, growing old alone in that place that seems to drain the life out of anyone living there. To this day, I can't say for sure what was going on in that shed, in that house. Maybe it was just the weight of so much grief, of my aunt's unresolved mourning, the bad energy from years of suffering and resentment. Maybe it was my Uncle Carl's spirit or something worse that latched onto that weakness. Mrs. Carmen might have known more, but I never saw her again. Perhaps it was a combination of all those things, amplified by our own vulnerability, our fear, our misery. I have no answers. I only know it was real. And leaving was the only thing that saved us. I have a dark feeling that for those who stayed behind, the weight of those walls remains, slowly crushing them day by day. Hey everyone, thanks for listening. Click the notification bell to stay updated on all future narrations. I post new videos here every day. I hope to see you in the next one. On the screen now, I'm leaving 2 other great videos I know you'll enjoy. See you there.